So I accidentally forgot to record this review, but last year, last year I decided to rewatch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I wrote a review for it. I think I might have watched it around October, give or take. But anyway, here's my review of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which at the time I had watched for free on Tubi. So anyway, so this was not my first time watching the movie ever. I had watched this movie as a child with my dad. And of course it fucking scared me. Or it freaking scared me. Anyway, I decided to go back to it, kind of look at it, judge it, review it as an adult, In all honesty, I think it had been probably like 10 years since I watched it last. So the movie starts out with a great practical effect of a dead body. And I was curious where exactly it was supposed to take place. I'm not sure where the movie is supposed to take place exactly in the fictional world, though the radio in the background of the movie mentioned a Muerto County, Texas, which in real life doesn't exist. But it's funny because it's like, oh, muerto, which means like, dead, oh. The radio mentioned places all over the place, such as Dallas and areas around the Texas-Louisiana border. Overall, throughout the entire movie, Franklin was my favorite character, which, looking back, I didn't expect him to be. But when I watched it, I was like, Franklin's the smartest guy here. But one of my favorite quotes was when he called the antagonists of the movie a whole family of Draculas. What I thought was strange was how no one questioned why the hitchhiker had a giant red splat on his face or a taxidermied animal. I mean, I know like the dude would have been on meth in real life. You'd think they'd throw his ass out after he sliced himself with Franklin's knife. It was just wild to me that the hitchhiker wanted $2 for the photo he took of Franklin. And adjusted for inflation in 2023, that would be $13. $13 for one photo. Even worse was that he set the photo on fire when the group refused to pay for it. I think that this movie was the reason why my dad told me to never pick up hitchhikers or to hitchhike. It was interesting to me that there was some crazy zodiac retrograde stuff. American Astrology was the magazine used in the movie, though I don't know if it was real, let alone if it's still around today. Looking at the van, it's nice to know that the license plate to Texas vehicles hasn't changed in the past 50 years. And the old man at the gas station looked like a grand wizard, if you catch my drift. Which is interesting is that this gas station was in Bastrop, Texas, which is still around today, actually. Watching the movie and then seeing Bastrop today is wild. In the 70s, when this movie was filmed, the area was so rural. And now Bastrop, for those of you that don't know, Bastrop, Texas is outside of Austin, and just about anything, like an hour or two outside of Austin is pretty city now, to put it that way. Before I moved to Texas, I thought that getting barbecue at a gas station sounded so gross, which is why I found that plot point in the movie, like, so disgusting. Like, oh my god, they're getting barbecue gas station! Ah! Like, I thought it was so nasty. But now that I've lived in Texas for 10 years, it's actually not weird at all. With places like Buc-ee's, the Texan, getting barbecue is just another thing you can get at a gas station. So I don't know, thinking back, did the writers of this movie do that on purpose? Like, or did they just think like, it's Texas, we're going to get some barbecue? Because, I don't know. I don't know if they knew people would react that way. But anyway, so the gang ends up going to the giant old house that looks like it's from the 1800s, and honestly, it probably was. I believe it was the old family home to Franklin's grandparents, but there wasn't much more to that part of the story. And I kind of don't really understand, like, I guess that point of the plot. Like, oh, we're gonna go to Grandpa's old house, which is abandoned. And then what? What were they gonna do after that? I don't know. Maybe they didn't know. Whatever. And of course, the historian in me saw such such an interestingly made house architecturally. I just couldn't help but be like, wait, I want to know more about that house, you know. But anyway, I believe, wait, no. When they got to the house, though, I felt really bad for Franklin because everyone went upstairs and they started playing around when poor Franklin couldn't. This part of the movie actually really showed how dangerous it was for people like Franklin to be alone. I think it was foreshadowing to later events in the movie showing how vulnerable he was. And in case I don't like put a picture down, the character Franklin was disabled. He was in a wheelchair. And so of course he couldn't go up and down the stairs. I don't think that was ever explained. I don't know what the lore was for that either. But anyway, once again, I found that Franklin was the smartest guy in the group by far. He was the only one to notice the blood left on the van may have been a marking to indicate to some party somewhere. What was hilarious to me about this scene, though, was that Franklin had a sausage in the corner of his mouth like a cigar when thinking about all this. Like, now that I've lived in Texas long enough, I'm like, man, some of this is just really Texas to me. Like, you know, any other movie, you would have a guy smoking a cigar while thinking. No. In this movie, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you got a guy fucking thinking with a damn sausage. Anyway, so later on, there's Pam and her boyfriend, and they go to the old swimming hole to fornicate, but the place is dried up when they get there. And it actually made me sad when I realized how ridiculous it was that they were wearing pants. Why? Why are they wearing pants? I mean, it's so hot here, and you could tell that when they filmed the movie, it was absolutely a hot day or two. What was strange to me, though, was how they just decided to go snooping on the old man's farm close by. Like, what was the point? You could just go somewhere else for gas. During the scenes that show the property, I came to realize where the plot of Dead by Daylight came from. So much of that game was based on this movie alone. And as a side note, I thought that the house was really beautiful. The house that the murders took place in. For some reason, seeing teeth on the porch didn't scare Pam's boyfriend away. In fact, he went in the house when no one answered. And the sound of pigs squealing didn't scare him away either. And of course, this is where Kirk's death scene appears, or occurs. Kirk's death is one of the most iconic in film history. Absolutely. I don't think I would find somebody who would disagree with me on that. The intro to Leatherface clocking him in the head is just so iconic, I guess you would say. It's so horrifying. And I'll never forget seeing it as a child. It scared me to bits. And honestly, it was scary watching it again at the age of 30. I mean, Gunnar Hansen was an amazing guy. His stature really leaned into making him freaky as hell and perfect for the role as Leatherface. I couldn't help but think, though, if you see chickens in a cage, in a house, on a farm, then you need to get the fuck out. I can't blame Pam for going into the house looking for Kirk, though, since he disappeared in there. In my notes, I wrote, Jerry, you're an asshole. I think Jerry was the guy with the fro and the glasses. Anyway, I don't mean to make everything about Manson, but I couldn't help but notice that the actress who played Sally looked like Sharon Tate. And I've always wondered, just in general, not with this movie, but just in general, I've always wondered how many actresses played roles that might have been originally for Sharon or could have been for Sharon. That's something I always thought about. But anyway, I see how so many things, though, were inspired by this movie, such as the Bubba teeth, for example. And I wondered, did Bubba's family always live there? You know, it'd be kind of crazy if so, because Franklin and Sally grew up going to their grandpa's house, which wasn't far from where Bubba, Leatherface's family lived. And interestingly, the inside of the house reminded me of the house in the 1990 version of Night of the Living Dead. One more so, give or take. But the layout, to me, was kind of similar. It was crazy to think of how many vehicles... It was crazy to think of how so many of the vehicles in this movie and appliances are probably 80 years old, if not more, by now. And that's if they even still exist. I also noticed that the tags to the cook's truck were out, expired by about 20 years, in the 70s. So this guy was driving a truck with tags that expired in like 1956. I was like, dude, what? Anyway, I found the broom scene really funny, though. What was also funny was how the old man / the cook was concerned with the electricity bill, which was pretty funny. But what I didn't find funny was the racism, of course. I don't understand a lot about the concept of the grandpa. He looked very moldy. And this is something I never understood the entire time I've known and watched this movie my entire life. I guess I'm just too much into the backstory and lore of things. For me, I'm like, so what's up with the grandpa, Did they live there this whole time? Who's the mom? Blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, was the grandpa 1,000 years old or something? What was going on with that? The lore in the movie seems to imply that the family had been killing people for generations, decades upon decades. And I had the thought, this was the first time I ever thought of this when I watched the movie last year. Was the barbecue sold at the store made out of people? I don't think that's ever been answered anywhere. Anyway, it was, of course, overall a good movie. Scary. I think if I had been 30 years old in 1974, I would have pooped my pants watching this. But anyway, there's a reason why it's still, beloved to this day. It's very iconic. I think in some ways, thinking about it, I didn't write it down, but I think that Texas Chainsaw Massacre even inspired Halloween in 1978 in some stances, because Leatherface was kind of like the beginning of those super iconic, frightening villains, so to speak. It was strange because the movie felt short, but this was in a good way. It wasn't too long, nor did it drag on. There wasn't much lore to the plot, though small pieces of dialogue implied that the killers, of course, had been doing this for years. I wonder who their mom was, though the thought is actually kind of disturbing to think about, because I don't think it's a good answer one way or another. By today's standards, it's not as scary as what you see in other parts of media, though it might be if it's your first time watching the movie. I think having seen the movie in the past took away some of the scare, of course, and also watching it when other people were awake in my house. Because if I watched this alone in the dark at 3 a.m., the house was completely dark, I would be scared. I would probably feel really anxious. But anyway, I think the movie is mandatory for anyone interested in horror films as a whole, because honestly, historically, it's important. It's a historically important horror film, as strange as that might sound, but it's integral to many of the tropes that we hear and see today. The movie definitely influenced multiple pieces of media that came after, and was among the new wave of horror that was to come. The 70s really saw a switch in how horror was acted out, where 10 years prior, many pieces of film were still in the classical version of acting. The best way for me to put it was how my high school English teacher conveyed it my senior year. Back in the 50s, for example, you'd see movies and the actors would be acting, where men would have this slightly over-the-top vibrato in their acting. In modern day, you don't see that. Many actors live as the character they're playing to make it more believable. TCM starts in this new era where the events are portrayed as real, and the viewer is sucked in as the movie seems like a dramatization of what was described as true events. So, no slime. I really don't think it's a slimy one at all. I would say that this was 4 out of 5 zombies.